Well, Dr. John, thanks for joining us today on the Destiny Leaders podcast. I've been wanting to do this for a year or more, and we finally get to do it today. So welcome.
Good. Thank you.
You know, looking over your resume and knowing we attend church together, actually, which is kind of ironic. It's amazing who you're setting in our church buildings, and we don't always know it, you know. But wow, when I was looking over your resume, just so amazed with all the, number one, the variety and the exposures that you've had, the educational background. So you have previously been, for most of your adult career, Colonel Jonathan Philibom. And so why don't you take a moment and tell our audience a little bit about your military career and kind of what you did in the military.
Okay. Thanks again for having me, Phil. Appreciate it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do coming out of college. I had a management computer science degree, but when that job fell through, I got pretty hungry and went to talk to a recruiter, and they said, you ought to go in as a pilot. And it was an interesting thing when you talk about the Air Force versus the other services. But nonetheless, I was ushered in. It took me a couple years to get into the pilot training program, but once I did get through that, spent most of my flying time in tankers, doing in-flight air refueling, and that was pretty exciting. It wasn't, what you would call the top mission of the Air Force, but we sure had a lot of fun doing that.
Well, let me interrupt you, because that's like 100 combat or combat support missions, right? And
we did. There was a lot of military operations other than war, they call it, that are not, full op, World War I or Vietnam or Korea, but Persian Gulf War, obviously I spent a lot of time there. And so there was a lot of great things that happened, losses, friends that you lose in combat or things like that, which is, gives you a little bit of pause, are you in the right place? And certainly I felt God's fingerprints on my career even early on. But then as you get a little more senior, you kind of start out as a junior pilot and you move up to be an aircraft commander, and then you're kind of in charge of that small group of personnel, depending on how big the crew for that airplane is. And then you become an instructor and then an evaluator. And then the next thing they say, well, we're not going to pay you for your hands anymore. Doesn't matter how good they are. We're going to start paying you for what's in your head.
Wow.
And you move up to be a, commander of a squadron. It's about 100 personnel. And then maybe a group commander, which I was able to do that and fly some different airplanes. Got into kind of the cargo world. And they have about 4 or 5 of those 100-man units that you oversee. And then thanks to the Lord, I was able to be promoted then into being a wing commander, which will have 4 or 5 of those individual group level. So it was about 1,200 people that I got a chance to work with as a wing commander.
Not everybody has that opportunity or makes the rank to I know we have to have them, but that's quite an accomplishment. And so what are some of the things having that level of responsibility? Part of our theme for this quarter is we're talking about character and we're talking about integrity and the things that go with it. This whole focus this quarter is reminding leaders, Christian leaders especially, but leaders in general, that your character matters. So how would you, having kind of an outside the church experience in leadership at such a high level, what are a few things that you would pull out of those or come to mind that you see as really critical?
Well, there's a lot of things that do come to mind. My wife tells me to talk slow because there's so many things you think about.
Yeah.
But so first off is you got to realize that with any organization, people are at the center. And they, at least in the military, are what makes the mission go. If you don't have good relationships, if you can't build strong relationships, if you can't create an element of trust, then your mission is not going to be very successful. So building successful relationships is probably one of those key characteristics that you need to work on. At least I feel like that's what has been the success for me. When you have such a diverse body of people within an organization, you really need to be able to take kind of a humble approach and say, teach me a little bit about what you do.
Right.
You go to that explosive ordnance disposal team and you say, I've been a pilot. I can't speak your language. Tell me how, what I need to know. And so I think that builds relationship, and that helps out quite a bit there.
Even though you're working for me and I'm responsible for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It helped me understand, why do you need one of those new 80-pound, EOD suits,
Right.
every 6 months or however long it is. Or you drop in on your medical professionals and you find out, what's the challenges we're having now? Well, we can't get all the right pharmaceutical support that we need because of the contractual issues that's going on. So it's like, teach me a little more about that. How can I help? And so I think that you find that character, at least in the military, and I think with a lot of other places, it really could be spelled, as being a servant to those people that you work with. And I think the minute that you say, those people work for me, I think you've probably lost sight of where you're at there. So I do think that, wanting to learn about what other people in your organization do is important, because if you are on some kind of a pedestal where you just aren't touchable, where they don't have a correlation, there's not a relevance, they don't see how they fit into your mission. You're the guy that's sitting in the front office, and so you have to create some relevance and make people understand that they're part of the mission, and if it doesn't go, then it don't go.
Yeah, absolutely. How many years were you in the military? What was your career there?
32 years. I had 12 years of full-time active duty, and then I decided to go into the reserves, and the whole Air Reserve component with the Guard and Reserve is really a very unsung hero type of thing, because there's full-time people there, which is what I become, a full-time reservist. And so I still went to work wearing the uniform, the same thing I did the day before when I was full-time, even when I was in the reserves. And so because of that, we got a chance to play with the active duty quite a bit. So whatever mission they were in, we got a chance to be in. And so that was a unique dynamic too, because that type of an organization is more like the church. You ever try to push a rope up a hill?
Yeah.
Well, it's just kind of the same thing in the reserves. On active duty, you had that non-judicial punishment, Article 15. You had all these kind of resources where you could just say, go do, and they would have to go do. But in the reserves, all those members are volunteers. And just like the church, the layperson, isn't really obliged to do anything that they don't want to do.
That's right. Yeah.
And, so you've got to create relationship, I think, not only where we were at in the reserves, but also in the church. I think that's key.
I hear a lot from leaders about motivation. How do I motivate the people that I'm trying to serve or trying to lead? And I've said a lot, and I think it's true. It's hard to motivate unmotivated people. It's really hard to motivate them. But if you are going to move people, it seems like that relationship is the basis of that. That people who are not predisposed toward high levels of motivation can become that if they are in the right relationship with the right people, because it's kind of infectious. That level of enthusiasm, that level of love and support, service, kind of it draws in and purges out. And I had a friend that used to say that if you do the right things long enough, then the wrong people will leave your life and the right people will be drawn in. Did you find that to be true?
Yes. First off, you had to role model what you wanted people to do. If you wanted people to have a very humble approach to something, if you wanted them to be internally motivated, you had to demonstrate that, and you had to show them, because people will do things more off of what they see than necessarily what they hear. More oftentimes than not, I'll just say. Yeah. So, yes, I agree.
So kind of just recapping your career in the military, you began as a pilot, essentially, and wound up as a wing commander. That's pretty good success.
Yeah.
If you ask
me.
And I think
God,
flew the first lady and the cabinet and people like that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we flew tankers most of the time for probably 20 years, and in the last 12, I cycled between airlifters, the C-17, a kind of a tactical long-range airlifter, and then the big C-5 that we have, largest airplane in the Air Force inventory. But I was able to wrap up in my last assignment with undoubtedly the best job in the Air Force, being a wing commander of an executive airlift unit where, yes, the first customer is the first lady, congressional delegates, ambassadors, other foreign dignitaries. It was remarkable. First part, there was just, you had great people, because we had a very intensive recruiting process.
I can imagine.
I mean, it wasn't just the background checks that people had to pass, but there was relational aspect that you had to pass as well. And that's what we called it on our little interview sheet we have. It was a 3-interview process. So we got to work with great people. And then that particular job, of course, the unit was such high visibility. If you need a resource, you're probably going to get the resource. And we operated several years under those continuing resolution authorities, which is very, very difficult for government organizations to operate there. And so resource-constrained environment, in that job, we didn't really experience too much. And then I got a chance, amazing people we got to, serve. And that's why I really call it, because we were not exactly like bus drivers, but I mean, our job was to transport these people from point to point. And they took care of us just like we would take care of them. So that was a great reciprocal relationship.
How long did you do that?
That was about 2.5 years.
Okay.
So.
Well, I can only imagine the stories that are there, behind that door.
Yeah.
When you're carrying people like that we see on TV every day, but yet your job is to get them to the next appointment, wherever they're supposed to be. And I'm sure there's a lot of interesting stories.
Yeah. Well, and just by way of example, it's the impact of what you facilitated is really the thing. So if you took the Secretary of State to a particular place, and then the day after you left there, you watched the news and you found out, oh, we have this new agreement with this other country.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I think my career, again, blessed to have spent sleep on something like 68 different countries. Wow. in my time there. So rare opportunities, I think.
So is it fair for me to ask who your favorite passenger was?
Who? I know there was some.
And it's okay if you can't.
Well, yeah, I don't think I had a favorite. I'll just put it that way. I had some that were a little more challenging. I'm kind of glad to have pushed away from some of it now. Here I am 8 years removed from wearing the uniform. But I don't miss those calls in the middle of the night from the White House travel office that says, hey, Colonel, what's your crew doing out there? And you have to kind of answer what's happening. And of course, with the way satellite phones work and everything, I already knew what was happening. Yeah. But
that's what comes to mind when I think about that, is the many flights that I've made where I wanted to stop by the cockpit on the way out and say, what, y'all get a phone call as we were landing? Somebody was on the phone and not watching the runway, it felt like. So, it's different if the First Lady says that, that was a great landing or doing.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories there, yes.
I can imagine. So, the military career, stellar, obviously, and so much leadership that is gained from that. But you actually mentioned a business degree coming out of college, and then you built on that. So, from kind of shifting to academics, because I know a lot of your world now is spent working with colleges and universities and their doctoral programs, helping students that are working toward graduate degrees at some level. So you went on to earn your MBA and then eventually a PhD in business administration. So you're a bona fide brainiac in the world of business administration and organizational leadership. So
I've heard a lot of titles. That's pretty much that's one of them. So my dad, I have to credit my dad. He led me to Christ at the tender age of 10, September 1971, and so I just gave all that away. But he was instrumental in telling me, he says, I don't want you to feel like you have to become an electrician like me. There's nothing wrong with blue-collar workers or anything. He just said, I don't want you to have to work that hard. I don't want you to be out in the winter, outside or, when it's hot and things like that. And so he said, take all the education that you can get, especially if someone's going to pay for it. So about mid-career, I went ahead and got the MBA while I was in the service. And then right towards the end of my career, we started thinking about what does chapter 2 look like after I finished this time. And so it was a little bit like a pair of wooden shoes. I thought I'd just try it on and see. And I like learning. That was something that I picked up along the way in the Air Force. And so I used the Air Force funds to help get the PhD. Business administration was kind of what I hoped to do before I got into the service. And so I was kind of trying to bring it back. And then there was actually a lot of expertise that I feel I gained when you lead an organization of 1,200 people and you've got several $billion discretionary budget and things like that. You really have to have a lot of business acumen to kind of work in that. So the education was kind of a natural offshoot of really what I was doing. And of course, at the time, Air Force 2 was big in wanting you to get as much education as you could. I mean, it wasn't just that civilian education, but the Air Force, like all the services, have their own internal military education.
Right.
And so there's a staff college, there's a war college, and those are year-long things that I did while I was in the service on top of the civilian education.
So really a vast experience. And, I think it's so interesting because most of our audience are either pastoring churches or leaders in churches in various positions. And sometimes we hear, it's like an echo chamber. We hear from the same people that have the same perspectives. Maybe they have a different technique or a little different take on something, but generally, because our world is kind of the world of the sacred, we don't often hear leaders talk about real world. So I was really excited about this opportunity to interview you because you represent, even though you're a devoted Christian, we go to church together, and I know what an amazing job you're doing with the Sunday school department. But we don't often get a chance to hear from someone that has a unique perspective. And I think most of our audience are then begin to listen for similarities and intersection points where, it's like this, so that's the same thing there. And so I really appreciate the time that you have devoted not only to your own education and your own career advancement, then being willing to share that with us, And so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the things maybe that you have either seen or experienced from either world, either academically or military, that are some common experiences. People are people, What are some things that come to mind that you could share with the audience that relate to, techniques that you learned that help? You mentioned one of them, that sense of building trust as kind of the predicate for relationship, and then letting the demands of the job evolve out of the strong relationships. Are there any other things that come to mind? It's like these things you do and these things you don't do if you want to be successful leading people.
Yeah. So to say that I had, great relationships with every single person that I encountered in my military career or that I encounter along my academic journey, again, I've got somewhere between 70 and 80 students every term between the two schools that I teach at. There's going to be those that just really want to embrace whatever the culture issues are going on, whether it's, I'm going to use AI to write my paper, research, or I'm going to, try to go across the academic integrity. Those that try to, kind of slide under the radar, particularly in the military, there was almost a bent towards preferring to beg for forgiveness later instead of asking for permission beforehand. And so I find that there was a lot of correction that was going on. And what is difficult with trying to correct people, if you don't have a relationship with them, is, they think that you're just trying to, get at them somehow. And I think if you have a little bit of a relationship, I think that helps out. So there's things like, being a lifelong learner, understanding how to be internally motivated. And I think you'd have to find ways to do that. So the techniques I would use is say, hey, we're on this journey together. I'm here to walk along beside you. Particularly as students get long in the tooth in the academic world, what I find as a professor is after a couple years, they start to get demotivated, demoralized, and they're just tired. And so, believe it or not, it took me 5 years actually to get my terminal degree. It was kind of this long, I was still in the service, I was deployed a lot. And so I had a lot of reasons to quit at any point in time, other than I kept kind of hearing my dad's voice in the back of my head saying, hey, come on, no, you can do this. And so I took some of the page out of his book, the way I'd try to motivate those students as well, saying, look, there's a reason why you started that. Let's go back to that, and I think that by being able to empathize, how some of those challenges, instead of just being a sympathizer, I think we have a lot of our faculty, academic advisors that are really kind of more sympathizers instead of being empathetic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard if you haven't lived there, you don't know. I mean, I had one student that said, my son just died and I don't know where to go.
Mm.
And I said, you know what? I lost my 2-month-old daughter, and I know where you think life is stopping.
Right.
And so we found a way to work forward there. I work with advising, but I mean, I think those are the same thing when you have those. I had military people. A lot of them fell into the wrong crowd, not necessarily while they were in our organization, while they were doing duty, but where their life was, their sphere of people and circle of influence. And I was just saying, no, you need to look at what people are pouring into you instead of taking out of you.
Yeah.
And so it was.
There really is a correlation, isn't there, in terms of who we become based on the influences of our life. Who we allow the opportunity to speak into our life and to influence us has so much to do with who we become. And we're focused in this quarter that we're talking about on character, about being rather than doing. And I think a lot of times from my leadership experience, which is certainly dwarfed by yours, but from my leadership experience, it seems to me that getting someone off the goal to complete and task to check off the box and focusing on the development, the type of person they become. I think it was, I'm trying to think of the lady's name that said it, but there was a trainer, well-known trainer of leaders that said we do a disservice to young leaders when we tell them what they could do before we tell them the manner of person they should become. That's my loose paraphrase, but that's the basic idea. And I think you probably would agree, and if you have any insights or thoughts to add to that helping someone become a better person, that's why you hear us, and our audience hears it all the time about values, and they'll hear me say something like vision don't mean squat. Well, that's really not true.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do in a kind of a hyperbolic way is say that vision is further downstream in your life. It's the values that you build, the foundational blocks that you build in your life that will determine your success. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. Self-awareness has got to be right on the very front edge of your journey. Our Air Force core values, for example, if you were to ask me if there were a class that I wish that I could have taught every young lieutenant or airman that coming in the front door, I would have them to take a class on our Air Force core values. At the time, and I think it still is, it's integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Now those core values,
wow.
I think it just fit hand in glove for me. I don't know why it was such a great fit, or did that imprint on me before I really embraced it, or did I have that and then it was a good reflection. But those core values, they start out right up front that your integrity has got to be uncompromising. It's got to be a conviction, a commitment. It's got to be something that that's undeniable. It's irrefutable. It's indebatable. You just can't go forward without integrity, and that's really the core, I think, of character that I've experienced with the Air Force. I think when we're asked to assess students' work, communicate with student work, I mean, you have to have a lot of that integrity with that to follow through. Service before self reflects what I would call the very next, almost 1.2, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Is that sacrificial nature. You have to be selfless. You have to find a way to serve others. If you're not raising your hand to volunteer for something, you're probably missing a bunch of opportunities to mature, to develop. And then finally, that excellence in all we do is about acknowledging that there's always improvement. I like to say I'm in that big room for improvement. And I think that we need to be looking towards that as well. So these core values help shape the way I would go to work every day. Of course, they were everywhere.
I might add, I'm talking about intersecting points where, okay, that translates I mean, a lot of churches would be better served if they would start with those basic three things: that sense of integrity and selflessness and service, as opposed to leadership, desiring to serve, and then that excellence. People in our culture today, the corner grocery stores using the highest technology and color printers and laser. I mean, we can't cut that off the list and expect to relate to the audience that in every single day are dealing with AI. They're dealing with, and the church has notoriously been historically 30 years behind technology. And so those three for the Air Force would make a good foundation for a lot of churches, for sure.
Yeah. And I think we have some of that in our churches. I think with moving around 17 times in that 32 years, we got an opportunity to go to a lot of different churches. I felt like I was church hopping, and yet that was the most dreaded terms I ever heard. So that was the first thing we'd look at, is where can we go to church, and number two, where can our kids go to school, and that would really determine where we'd live, because we'd have a pretty big circle around the base we could pick from, if it wasn't that remote. But I see that in a lot of churches where they have this deliberate, intentional staff leadership development aspect, and yet there have been some that they just don't have that. Now, part of that is almost the handicapping of the pastor that has at times stepped in. I remember a church we had in North Dakota, kind of remote. There wasn't probably a lot of people really raising their hand to volunteer to go up there, but he just had a lot of I'll just say vision issues, because he felt that he was supposed to do everything, and didn't get a chance to. I mean, it sounds like I'm bashing this pastor. It was just an observation, though.
Sure, of course.
That he obviously didn't get the delegation word, and then it's got to be, and I used the word already, deliberate or intentional. But you have to be purposeful with developing the people around you. That's part of propagating, what God has put into your life. If you're not creating the next person to, if Jesus tarries, what are you doing? I mean, you've got to have that where you build into other people.
Yeah, I mean, really, the kingdom at its core is building people. We don't have, and I can relate to that from a destiny perspective, because we've been kind of, we don't build buildings. We work with pastors and leaders that build buildings, but we're not building this, these network of large buildings that are directly proprietary to destiny. Our focus is people. I mean, at the end of the day, and really that's what Jesus did. And I'm not putting us on par with that, but I'm just saying that the core method and message of the kingdom is people at the center. I like what you said at the beginning of our conversation, that people are at the center of what we do. And that really, I mean, leadership is defined, right? That's who was it, Maxwell or somebody, the old Chinese proverb he quoted, that if you call yourself a leader, nobody's following, you're just taking a walk. And a lot of people in the world I come from, pastorally, are taking a walk. They may have some people walking with them, but in terms of really developing great people to allow the kingdom to go on from generation to generation until the Lord comes, is not happening in a lot of churches. One of the things that we found over the years working with leaders is the value of coaching and mentoring. I know that my life was in many ways shaped and defined by the people that I allowed to speak into my life. Some were there like for a lifetime, a mentor, or longer term, longer form. Coaching, I've had a lot of those. And when I think about coaching and mentoring and what's the difference, I think, okay, a coach might help me with if I'm a golfer, help me with my swing, but I may have a different coach that helps me with my putting. And, they're typically task specific and tend to focus on a particular element of my life, where mentors, on the other hand, there's more of a spiritual, organic nature where we're doing life together. And I know that you have a lot of experience with that and a lot of training in that. How would you speak to those two subjects, and what are a few things that come to your mind?
Great question. Thank you. First off, the difference, you mentioned the differences. I would also include another criteria there, is I think that coaching is typically a bit more short-term where mentoring is a long-term effort. Because when you begin to do life with somebody and you start thinking about pouring into or receiving out of that vessel from someone else, that's just not an overnight thing. You can get those direct coaching tips and stuff, and it's, like you said, a bit more task-oriented, and there's immediate applicability kind of thing. But mentoring is a much more effective, I think, if you're talking about those spiritual matters, with how to deal with life, and the challenges that come up there are different. Not to take away from coaching, because there is the place for that. I believe that everybody have a mentor, and then they ought to mentor someone else. I think that you ought to be one and have one. Yeah. Today I have at least 2 mentors. One that speaks into my life about once a month at the little coffee shop. We get down there, and I'm so grateful for that. It's coincident that we have some of the same things that we can empathize with one another on, and then the person that I mentor, they would say that I'm pouring so much into their life, and yet when I reflect on our time together, I feel like I'm gleaning at least as much as the very little that I could possibly be pouring into them. So there's a reciprocity in this process of mentoring. And so the Air Force was pretty big on having a formalized mentoring program, and that set some of the foundation. When I was in college, I didn't have anybody. But the Air Force, again, in their deliberate nature to try to develop people, they created this program where it was very structured. I mean, you'd have goals that you would set together. And I think that that's an important thing even now today. I mean, I'm going to be 65 in a few months, and it's like, I still need a mentor.
So what are some of the things that you, if you don't mind sharing some of them, that you said you have a mentor, you need a mentor. At this point in your career, in your life, what kind of things are you gleaning,
right?
Outside of friendship, and there's a value in just the companionship, the camaraderie, being able to commiserate about things. What would you be getting mentored in?
That's a good question. So, you'd think that you hit whatever your 50s or 60s, and you pretty much have your handle on, where about everything is going. But invariably, there's something that you haven't walked in, and in particular, for my case, my mom is now 88, and she's in this position where elder care is it's a stressful, foreign thing.
Yes.
Unfamiliar. And my mentor, my friend, he's speaking into me, not just encouragement, but he's giving me some real nuggets, to be able to deal with some of those challenges. You start thinking about, how do you get towards the end of your own life? I'm not sick. I don't have any health issues that I'm aware of.
Sure.
But you want to know, how do you finish well? And many times you need that more senior person or someone that's gone through some of those type of areas. I think finishing well is so important. Many of the Destiny leaders are not in the older generation, so this may not seem particularly valuable to them. But I think having a mentor in place that can speak into those kind of things. How do you finish well? For example, as you maybe you're not fit to work exactly with the young adults. Maybe that's not a good fit, or maybe you're not a great fit for praise and worship team. Okay, but you did that at one time. Now what do you do though? I mean, you're just not serving, the church.
Which is what happens a lot of times.
I mean, what are the areas that you can still connect to contribute and give back, and so there's that. And then, a lot of times it's just some practical, I've got, like I said, a couple of mentors. One of them that I meet with regularly every week. Every month, and we sometimes we talk about money, and just bouncing some things off. What would you think about this? I mean, and I'm at this point in life too, where I've got a son that lives out of state, and they're going to have their first child in June, and I want to make sure I avoid any appearance of favoritism, and so. Right. Hey, I've been thinking about buying a tiny home or something. And so how can I still contribute to my son and his wife and our grandchild there, and not just to this child and grandchildren we have here. And so, that's you have to trust somebody to open up to talk about that.
Yeah, you do.
But I think that's important that we have somebody to open up to. Mentors are just kind of like springboards. A lot of times God will speak to them directly to give you something. Sometimes they don't have anything, but they'll say, I'm your guy to pray with you about that.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, sometimes I need that more than anything else when we get together. So.
Absolutely. I'm reading a book right now written by one of our pastors, and it'll probably be published under the Destiny Leaders Publishing imprint, and it's on men. But there's a statement that he makes about control, and I know leaders a lot of times struggle with control. Mm-hmm. And I think, and the reason I mention or even bring it up in this segment of conversation about coaching and mentoring is it seems like a lot of times we struggle with coaching and mentoring because we feel the need to represent an image that's always in control. And here's one of the things he says in this book. He says, control promises safety and delivers isolation.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh wow, that's a mic drop right there.
Yeah.
And I think the act of recruiting coaches and mentors is a humbling thing that is very healthy. Yeah. And it is a kind of an antidote against that sense of control pushing us to places of isolation. Yeah.
Control, what a laughable term. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I kind of chuckled when you said it, but you have to be really proactive with this whole thing about coaches and mentors. Few people are just going to approach you Sunday in the church parking lot and say, right, I think I ought to be your mentor. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, and so you have to recognize your need for other people. Mm-hmm. God is our source. There is no doubt. But it's amazing how God will speak through a coach or a mentor if you let him. Mm-hmm. If you want God to speak to you more, it's not just about getting in your own private time in the Word. It's not just about your prayer time, how you open up that communication. It's taking this other opportunity of letting God speak to other people in your life. Mm-hmm. And if you have that isolationist mentality or control mentality, then you're missing an opportunity for God to speak to you.
Amen. Of course, thinking through the whole mentoring piece, let's talk about coaching for a minute. So you kind of defined so well about the two men that are mentoring you. What would be the role at this juncture in your life? What would be the role of a coach in your life? What would you need someone? What would be the function of that in your life?
65-year-old, formerly fit and trim Air Force guy, no longer. Yes. So I have another friend that I've been thinking about. That we're good friends. We go to church together, but his son is really, really a fitness guy, and I need some of that more tactile, very focused. Joe Friday, Dragnet, 1962. Just the facts, kind of focused coaching for continuing fitness as I get older. As you age, things change in your life. So there's another guy I've been thinking about approaching, about coaching me a bit on this concept of transitioning. 65 is the big point in time in life where you go to Social Security or Medicare or healthcare, and it's I was kind of virtually an institutionalized guy after 32 years of getting that paycheck every 1st and 15th of the month, and healthcare kind of provided for, and so I'm in this point in life where I have this need. And so if you have needs in your life, you shouldn't be afraid to go ask some questions. And maybe a coach is too formal of a term for somebody to feel like they're a coach. But again, that person who's been there, you need to just, what do they say? Suck it up, buttercup, and do it. Just reach out for the help. It's not a weakness to have a coach or a mentor. It's a strength.
It's a strength.
And I think that if we can embrace that, I think that God has even more for us. Not unlike the book that you wrote, we're made for more. Well, we're never going to get there. I mean, you have so much in your book. I can't really touch on it, and you didn't call me here to go through that book today. But to really reach more, we have to pursue more. We have to get after it through many means, not just one approach. You just can't say, I'm going to read my Bible more and I'm going to be a better husband, a better father or grandfather, or that's not going to be the magic bullet. It might be part of the attribution that gets you there, but typically success is born off of many faceted efforts of trying to be better.
Kind of stepping back just a little bit to maybe something a bit more pragmatic. Is there a management or leadership principle that you could summarize in a couple of minutes that you think, if I could only learn one thing from a leadership management perspective? For me, for example, something comes to mind is early on in my academic career, I was exposed to personality profiling and how each of us operate within. There's a plethora of different labels and different schools of thought, but yet they're basically similar. I have found those basic 4 personality types in the, say, DISC model, for example, to be very helpful. Like of all the things that I've studied, dealing with people, if there's one thing that if you master that, you can move up the ranks, and but that would be that for me. Is there something that comes to mind where you think, man, every leader needs to know this?
Well, I think what you're touching on there, for me, I would interpret that as a lot of that self-awareness. I've been able to accurately assess where my strengths and weaknesses are. Not a SWOT analysis, but more of just, what is these profiling tools? There's many out there,
Right.
Myers-Briggs, you just name them.
Sure.
But they'll give you this insight and say, okay, here's what we would see. Okay, now what do you do with that? But I think if you say, okay, that's who I am, then how can I build on that? What are the things that I am overbearing on? I mean, if those personality traits, what do they come out the wrong way or could be interpreted the wrong way? And then if I were to say one other thing besides those personality trait assessment tools, is to really learn how to be a good follower. Followership is a word that is not really talked about too much, but you're never going to be a good leader unless you can be a good follower.
Right.
And I think that is going to take some effort. And certainly in the military, it's, they don't bring you in the front door as a colonel. You start out as the little butter bar second lieutenant or,
Right.
airman basic or whatever.
Right.
Well, even in the church, I think we have a similar thing. They don't typically put too many people right in the pulpit on the stage, right out of, their ordination and credentialing process. So there's a development process that goes on, acknowledging and recognizing the development. So we know what we are, so for our self-awareness, we get a chance to practice some of that followership. How can we be good servants in what we are? And I think the minute that if we think of ourselves as anything other than a part of that Great Commission, we've lost that concept of humility. And I know that there's a lot of topics I feel like I've kind of interspersed here, but I think that when we talk about people and we talk about what does it mean to be a leader in the kingdom of God, that Great Commission, yes, Jesus was speaking to the 12, but that's spoken to us today too.
Speaking to all of us.
And if you think there's anything else more important than that, whatever your job is, whatever your actual lay position, that's the primary job that we have, in my opinion.
Yeah. Working toward transformation, really. In many ways, obviously that's what the church is. We're trying to evangelize and transform the life, to conformity to the image of Christ. And you mentioned a lot of the diversity that you'd seen in churches, 17 moves throughout your career. If there were 3 things, 3 pieces of advice you could give to either a pastor or a church planter or someone who that's going to be their lane that they're going to run in, spoken from someone who is quote unquote from the lay, from the pew, but yet with vast leadership understanding and experience, what are a couple of 3 pieces of advice you would give?
Authenticity. Now, I'll preface all this here with saying that sometimes you see good examples that you want to copy, that you want to mimic. Other times you see examples of things that you say, oh, I'm going to put that in my toolkit of things not to do.
Not to do, yeah.
And it's unfortunate that those lessons are learned that way. But authenticity with your relationships, I think, is critical because that builds a credibility with where your heart is. That relays to whoever you're communicating, whoever you're opening a relationship with who you are, what's at your core. It shows your heart, authenticity. I think that there's got to be a clear observance of your desire for the care and feeding of the flock, or of the task that you have in a particular body of Christ. If you're not genuine about helping people in their walk, you're probably missing why you're in a particular ministry. And then outreach is, I mean, we've got to always keep, Matthew 28:18 in the back of our mind. And I think no matter what our particular job is, maybe you're in the praise and worship team, maybe you're in the sound booth, or maybe you're, in the kids ministry, whatever those are, at the end of the day, I think we're successful when we can look back and see that we have advanced the kingdom. And I think that's got to be kind of primacy that we think about. And even if you're not a paid staff person, I think that's part of what our challenge is, our goal, what we need to be working towards. And so I hope those are three things. Did I get them?
Yeah. Well, there's more if you have them, but certainly I think three. And I think when we have conversations like this, it's good for us to know who's speaking to us, and then have a sense of a few things that they've learned along the way that can translate, and then allowing you the opportunity to speak right to them, being aware of the environment of the church. Tell me, just because I'm interested, and I've kind of got on this vein, so tell me, over those 17 moves, some of the favorite things you have seen in church that you thought, wow, they ought to do that in more churches because that was really great here. Yeah. And maybe in the back of your mind, a few things like, okay, that's something you don't want to do.
Yeah.
From a guy that's just had, moving with your job, so.
Right.
And we can take our local church out of it. So, I'm not talking about our local church, there's no pressure.
There you go. Okay.
But just generally, some things like that. I saw that once. It's like it may be a children's. I know the audience is going to be surprised, but most Sundays you're working in the children's department of our local church. So here it is, a pilot, flew, the equivalent of Air Force One, and all the experience, PhD working with students, and on a typical Sunday morning at our church, you're in a T-shirt down with the children in worship and helping your daughters and son-in-law are on staff there. And that's one thing that Chelsea does. And I know it gives you great joy to get to work with her.
It does.
But what are a couple things, do's and don'ts, or things that really spoke to you that you've witnessed over the years?
Yeah. Okay, so programs. That's a big word. A lot of churches try to have programs. I think because it's difficult for any church to have enough staff to cover all of the different things, whether it's prison ministry, it's shut-in ministry, other, kitchen ministry, all these kind of different programs that are out there. What I have seen is the spectrum. I've seen those programs at churches where we're just having a program to have a program. That they don't have somebody that's kind of the belly button. That's kind of an Air Force term. Sorry. That really is passionate about that, and they just have somebody kind of notionally tagged against it. And so the program it's there, but there's not a passion about it. And I've seen where those generally have been pretty highly ineffectual, and that's unfortunate because it's not that it's a bad program or even the person's bad, but that's just not their calling. And so I think that where I have seen programs and different ministries be really successful is when you've got that person that everybody in the church could say, I know what that person's calling is, and I want to be assured of my calling as much as that person is. And so that's been both a joy and a sorrow that I've seen across some of those moves, because you see all that effort that goes into it. I've found that size has zero influence on how effective a particular ministry can be. I think churches, again, very small, like 20 family churches, we were stuck almost in a remote location, and that was all there was. I mean, there just wasn't any more people there. Have been on fire. I mean, you pick any large church, I'll stack them up against it. Dr. Cho's church, I mean, huge monster churches, but I would stack a little bitty church up, and their effort to spend time seeking God about what can we do. We have very, very meager resources. We're not going to be able to send all 20 people in our church off into the mission field. Lord, what do you want us to do? And when they seek that out and they spend a lot of time on their knees, those are the churches that I think are very, very effective. So those can be large or small.
Yeah.
But I think that's very encouraging to see those small churches dig in from that perspective that, we can do something. And what can we do well?
What I hear you saying is, I think it was the poet Elizabeth Arden that said, you owe it to all of us to get on with what you're good at. I think sometimes we think, okay, an individual has a calling, but I think in many ways a church has a calling. Yes, we all have this comprehensive, generalized call, but then there's that specific heart for something. And in my experience, I've seen churches that identify that. What is it specifically that is our contribution, or what are we called to do? And then God kind of staffs it. When we acknowledge it, embrace it, God kind of equips it with the right people who are sympathetic and have a desire to do that. And that's what I hear you saying is size really has nothing to do with that. Right. We're all called. Every church and organization is called by God, designed by God to do something specific, not just too general. So we're all involved in those general things, but then there's those specific things that we do. Yeah. And is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. Great word picture. You have times in your life that some lesson, some core foundational belief really needs to be emphasized. God wants to emphasize those things in your life, and sometimes they're through good experiences and sometimes not so good. So I remember getting out of the Air Force, and I got a job with a friend who I was in church with, and we moved our house to another state, and we were doing what we could. And at the end of that first month, the guy said, "Man, I'm just a little short on money." And he says, "Well, okay, catch me next month then." I mean, I'm still kind of transitioning. And long story short, we went 2.5 years. The guy didn't pay us anything. And during that time, I found myself with this tough lesson of not trusting God. I kept asking that 3-letter word, that 3-letter question, why, Lord, why? And almost like we're at this touchable point here, I really felt God say, "Why don't you trust me? Are you going back to when you lost your 2-month-old daughter? You know how long ago that was? Yeah. You trusted me then. I mean, you asked why for a little while, but I mean, why aren't you trusting me now?" And so it took me about 6 weeks to kind of nugget through that and to do a lot of research. And when I finally got through, Jeremiah 29:11 and the Proverbs, there's a lot of things about trusting, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. I found that we have to be, like Peter says, we have to be instant and ready to give an answer. And so a lot of that is being receptive to what God's will could be for you. Perfect example is our daughter, when we first moved to Heber Springs, we were building a house and we didn't have a lot of time, but she called me one day crying and said, "Dad, I can't believe it. Everybody is basically canceled on me for kids camp." And I said, "Do you know I just turned 63? And so I found out, I felt God say, "Hey, you can just be instant now. I mean, you may have kind of where you think you want to go, but you realize I'm the one with the pen in the hand." And so it was it wasn't about, me going and filling a position, because I found out it was a wonderful ministry. And I had lessons while I was there that I was learning. And I realized that was the reason why God made a way for me to go. I would have never learned those lessons any other way. Yeah. And so that's why my heart has been drawn to our kids ministry, where every child needs to have the opportunity to hear about Christ and to see the love of God in action, because many of our kids don't see that where they're at. So I think being ready to do what God wants us to do, changing our plans to be pliable to what His plans are, I think that's pretty important.
I've seen that a lot with young leaders, and over the years we've been blessed to work with a lot of dynamic young leaders. But I think pretty quickly, because we're all wanting to answer that question, who am I and why am I here? What does God got planned for me? And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we want to be a ministry that's kind of directional and helps to do that. But I think one thing sometimes we don't add is that equation you just added is like, okay, but what about being flexible enough to let the master use me as he wants to at his discretion, even if it doesn't fit into my pre-designed job description or my, my visionary. If it's not on my vision board, it's okay. If there's a need that I can meet, that there's something very, very healthy and growing in leadership to serve in any way you can at the moment.
Yeah. And I acknowledge that, a career of 32 years is probably the atypical way forward, in today's time. But I think likewise with our calling, I do believe there's some, CT stud, all the great missionaries, you think about these people, well, they have these clear calling and they spent their entire life going through.
Right.
But I do believe it at any moment in time that God could have said, I'd like you to go here instead. I'd like you to do this. And I think that we have to be open to that. The fact that it's his plan that he has for us. It's not our plan. And that's part of that trust and being able to get away from the why questions and just say, okay, Lord, you are in control. That's my submission to you, that it's not about me. I don't want anything to be about me. I don't need a title. I don't need to say I've been in this ministry for 40 some years or whatever long. And whatever you want from me is what I want to do.
Amen. Well, that comes through clearly as someone who just sees you sporadically. We're not there an awful lot at church, just traveling, but when we're there to see you and your service, your heart to serve, your attitude, with the credentials that you have. I mean, much of this that I learned about you, I learned in preparation for this interview, and now we've been friends for a couple of years, and so the level of humility and graciousness that you walk in is admirable, and it makes you pliable and available, without, because there's things, if you lead with your credentials, sometimes people don't ask you to do things that you really could do, and that's not been demonstrated. Your heart to serve has been beautiful. Great conversation. I want to kind of land the plane today with another question that I've kind of been waiting to ask you, and I wasn't sure it was going to fit into this conversation, but let's go for it. After all those years of being Colonel Phillibaugh, I didn't know you had your PhD. I didn't know that. I should have known, but I didn't know that. Nobody at the church calls you Dr. John. And I think there's a very relevant idea for ministers to listen to. So, because so often our identity is so wrapped up in what we have done. And I think men tend to, but not just men and women both struggle with that. When you've done something and been recognized in a way for so long, then suddenly the grace with which you don't lead with who you are, what you've done, or what you've accomplished, it's a very inspiring and a beautiful thing. But how have you navigated the emotions of, because there's got to be some emotions where everybody salutes when you walk in, and then suddenly it's like, they're slapping you on the back. And I mean, that's a big difference. How have you navigated that emotionally?
It's a good question. I think for me, it was just remembering that I could have never done any of that on my own. I mean, it wasn't me. The achievements, the chest candy, we call it in the military. You see the picture of your medals or whatever. It's like most of the time you just were in the right place at the right time. And I don't mean by accident. I just mean that I feel that for me, God had put me in the place to help those people where I could help them, or to be a part of an organization that achieved something together. I think similarly with being at Liberty University and being an online chair over there, we did some phenomenal things, but I was just part of a team. And of course, I mean, we would open up every day with prayer in the office there. I mean, what a miracle. I mean, how many people can, if you think about everyone that we know, and of course, you are surrounded by a lot of lay people, licensed, ministry, church avocation. They are going to open up every day in prayer. But the world is not like that.
Right.
And they don't get a chance to do that. So I couldn't have made an opportunity, for example, for a young man that walks into my office and says, "Hey, I'm an alcoholic and I'm not going to make it to tomorrow." I just happened to be there,
Yeah.
and I couldn't have done it. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to make that happen. So it's more of just recognizing my place. I'm part of God's plan to do what He wants me to do, and so I think that's, if I could say, the humility of trying to transition from everybody stands up in the auditorium, all 1,200 people in your wing when you walk in, to realize that was a chapter that God put me there at that point in time. And, I knew that it wasn't going to last forever. Unless Jesus came. And then I was, okay, so I was at that point. If Jesus came, great. But at the same time, He didn't come right then. And so I move into the next chapter.
So there's no subliminal or latent desire when you walk in to have all your kids and my grandkids,
not at all,
your wife stand up.
Not at all. It was actually,
because that's pretty heady stuff. When
it was
happened
year
after year.
For me, it was just awkward, Phil. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but and then something about, I remember there was a book I read. I know you're not here to endorse books, but it was a book called Servolutions, Dino Rizzo. Mm-hmm. And I read that book as a young captain, and what I got out of that was that you have to have a radical approach in your life to serving one another. And the minute you think that you're somebody at the head of a table or of an org chart or something like that, you've probably missed the reason why you're there. And so that happened pretty early in my career. So yes, it was kind of heady, and but I didn't live for that. That wasn't what got me up in the morning. What got me up in the morning was what opportunity was going to God bring across my plate that day. One of the most influential guys in my military career was an Air Force chaplain. Randy Thornton was his name. And on the drill weekends, he pastored a little Baptist church here in Arkansas, of all places. I was a wing commander in Illinois, but on the drill weekends, he would beat me there. And I don't know how he did it, because I was at 4:00 every Saturday and Sunday. I was at the gate with the security guards, making sure that they knew I appreciated what they did. But he would beat me there, and he'd have a cup of coffee, or in my case, I don't drink coffee, I drink tea. He would have a cup of tea ready for me going out the door to meet with those security forces guys. And he would ask me a direct question: what are we going to do today about helping people? And that really sunk into me. And I realized, if I can wake up each day to think about, what am I going to do to help people? How am I going to develop people? How am I going to pour into their lives? What can God get out of this? How can we grow those people? We were talking about members of our unit. He's a chaplain. He has a very specific, narrow job.
Right.
But he wanted to know how he and I together could partner on that. And so that was a very powerful time. And that helped me to see really what my job was there. It wasn't about talking to the White House travel office. I had to do that from time to time, but that wasn't the big reason why I was there. So,
yeah. Well, honestly, we've covered so much in our conversation, and I know it's going to be such a blessing to leaders. Thank you for being willing to share and for bringing such vast experience and understanding, knowledge. Thank you for all the input that you're having, and from your role as professor with these different schools. And I know your discipline that you're talking about is business administration largely, but that Jesus in you can't be hidden, and you're working with Christian universities largely. So thank you for that, for the investment you're making in leaders that will be forming and shaping the landscape of Christianity in the days ahead. Thank you for that. I'd love for you to take a moment and just pray for our audience. And,
I'd be glad to.
We have these conversations, but at the end of the day, the Holy Spirit has to pull out the nuggets that can be transformative to them. And so, in this particular quarter where we're focused on character and spiritual formation and that sense of identity in Christ, would you just take a moment and and pray over our audience, and
Mhm.
just whatever the Lord shares with you to pray for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Father, we come to you in Jesus' name, and it's been an honor to spend some time with Phil
Thank you,
today
Lord.
to talk about integrity and character and what this quarter's kind of focus is for the Destiny leaders. I lift each one of them up to you, Father, and I pray that today there was some nugget that they would receive that they could kind of noodle around a little bit, they could think on, they could meditate, and yet it'd be something that they could fuse on to their DNA that would help be a driver in their life. It would help them to see what your plan is for them. It would help them to see the different characteristics that it takes to be integrity first, to be service before self, or to exhibit excellence in all that they do. And I know I'm taking a page out of the Air Force core values, but really, Father, I believe there's biblical and scriptural background on these things. And so this is what our audience really, I think, come to hear today. And so I pray that each one would have their needs met, that they would see an opportunity to grow, particularly that they would find the word deliberate in their vernacular more often, that they take that time to be intentional about how they not only develop themselves to be good followers, to be leaders, but to build that into those around them and the teams that they have around them. So I thank you again for this opportunity just to break open a few topics. I pray, Father, that it would be blessed and multiplied by your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Destiny Leaders Podcast. If you'd like to know more about Dr. John, you can drop us, or if you have a question for him, you can drop us an email, and I'll be sure and forward that on to him, and we'll get an answer for you. Thank you for being with us today. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation.